and more are joining as I'm speaking. So I think we should just get started if we can. And let me say thank you once again to those that have just joined for taking the time out of your day to join the call here with Arcadia about this hot topic. This very hot topic called strategic thinking and shaping what happens next. My name is Steve Ellis. I'm one of the partners here at Arcadia Consulting. And I've been given the task to, I guess, navigate the next 60 minutes around this topic of strategic thinking. Let me kickstart straight away. Strategic thinking is often associated with or positioned for the elite, for senior leaders, because they're the ones doing strategy. Today isn't about strategy per se, but the thinking that goes into strategy. And I would argue that thinking skills and thinking about your strategies or your approaches to making decisions is the domain of everybody. Dare I say, because I've got 4 children, that I find children are some of the best strategic thinkers, or certainly the best strategic influencers that I've ever come across. So I don't see that it's only the domain of the most senior people in your organization. I hope you see that similarly. Just before we do dive into it, you will hopefully have the chat function available, but I do need to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. We will be sending a recording to you. What we will be doing is editing out any individual participation. So if you do contribute to the chat, which I really ask that you do, then that will be deleted for data protection reasons, so that you'll get your video copy of this webinar without any of that personal contribution. I just thought I'd share that with you. I'm really going to talk about 2 things in the very short amount of time that we have available. I kick this off by saying it's a hot topic. So why is it a hot topic? Why is strategic thinking so important? And is it really important now for any specific reason? So I'll explain a little bit more about the why, and then maybe have 40 minutes or so on the how. There is a little bit of interactivity throughout the webinar, so please do dive in and share your thoughts as the webinar unfolds. Giving a little bit of perspective beyond myself and beyond Arcadia, I've just put 3 perspectives up on the screen when we're talking about strategy or strategic thinking. What do we really mean? Just to give a frame to the webinar. So Michael Porter, a widespread author from Harvard Business School, he talks about making choices. So it's not just senior leaders that make choices. We all make choices. So strategy is about making choices, trade-offs between some good things and some other good things. But I like the phrase deliberately choosing as opposed to reactionary choosing. So strategic thinking has got something about choices and being deliberate about those choices. A recent book, and one of my favorite books about strategy, written by Richard Rumelt. Strategy is about identifying critical factors in a situation and designing. There's the deliberate word again, I guess, the designer, not the person who's reacting. So designing a way of coordinating actions to deal with that. I also like the word action. We'll come back to that in a moment. So critical factors, designing and taking action. I like those words. And then if we want to go back a long time to Sun Tzu, the art of positioning and adapting. So I guess that's responding to context and situations. So is that self-awareness or social awareness? So the art of positioning and adapting to achieve a good outcome, in this case, victory, but with minimal conflict, based on a really good understanding of you and your world around you. So strategic thinking sounds like choices, sounds like being deliberate with those choices, sounds like understanding critical factors, being a designer. And some of those critical factors are contextual. Your self-awareness, your social awareness, and what's going on around you. That, I think, provides a good frame for our conversation today. So let's get into the why. I don't know if you've heard this sentence made about you. Maybe you've made it about others. It usually shows up in annual appraisals or when you're doing succession planning and you're thinking about who might take on that next role. How often have you uttered the phrase, or somebody else has said it, you know what, that person, they're good, they just need to be a bit more strategic, right? And I go, I'm hearing it a lot more. We're hearing it across our clients. The research suggests that there's a heightened demand for leaders or for individuals who are thinking more strategically. So I thought I'd share some of that research with you as to the why is this such a prevalent topic, and then dive into the how. So let's think big picture and context. One of the contexts is the quantity of change. This is taken from Gartner. If you go back to 2016, the average number of change events that a leader or a contributor in an organization would experience a year, significant change events, was about 2 a year. It's now 13. We are experiencing significantly more significant change events. And at the same time, our change responsiveness or change readiness or change willingness has dropped from 74 to 44%. So there's a lot of noise in the marketplace. There's a lot of noise, in the workplace. We're surrounded by things that are moving, things that are ambiguous, things that are changing all of the time. That might have something to do with the demand for strategic thinking, a demand for clarity from leaders, a demand for clear direction that can cut through all of that noise and provide a framework or some guardrails for teams to operate with. So it seems that the backdrop of change is driving a demand for improved strategic thinking. We know from McKinsey and their longitudinal studies that those organizations that think long-term, and long-term is often associated with strategic thinking, deliver higher revenue growth and significantly higher profit growth. It seems that strategic thinking helps leaders to navigate all of that uncertainty, all of that complexity, all of that change. Strategic thinkers are those people that don't allow for false certainty. They don't use hope as a strategy. They don't sort of try and say it will be okay and then have to have reactive swings to the latest news or the latest information. They seem to be in control. Even if new information is coming, they seem to have anticipated that and being able to manage their response to it. It also seems that strategic perspective and strategic thinkers, they're able to align execution with intent. They're doing it by design. I'm intentionally following a course of action, and I can align all of my resources and my execution to that direction, to that intent. And that's particularly important in a change environment. So research from Gartner, research from McKinsey seems to imply that there's a social need or a market need or an organizational need that's increasing because of all of the change. They're not the only ones. A partner of ours, Zenga Folkman, conducted a separate piece of research that really surprised me. I have to say I was shocked by this research. Based on 128,000 leaders using a 360-degree assessment tool measuring leadership effectiveness against 19 differentiating competencies. Zenga Folkman hold on to the world's largest database of leaders. They have 1.5 million leaders on that database. They took a section of that database and split it out into 2 groups. Those people that had high emotional intelligence, but low competency in strategic thinking or strategic perspective, and those people with high strategic perspective and low EQ. This was the surprising result for me. Those with high EQ, well, they outperformed the other group, particularly in the areas of integrity and collaboration. But what surprised me, because I've been an advocate for EQ for the last 30 years, and this research, by the way, doesn't dismiss EQ. It's just how prevalent strategic thinking has now come to the surface. Their research is saying, wouldn't it be good if you combined EQ and strategic thinking? But what I noticed in their data was those people with high strategic perspective or high strategic thinking outperformed those with high EQ on 14 out of the 19 competencies, right? So it seems that that's a real elevator of leadership effectiveness, strategic thinking. And their research suggested there might be 4 reasons why there was a correlation between those leaders with strong strategic thinking or perspective and their ability to have other key competencies as leaders and make an impact on the business. The first of which is those leaders with strategic perspective were able to create alignment and purpose. They were able to distill very complicated data and give their teams a really powerful why. and that why was able to resonate across the organization. So gelling a community of people together towards a strategic direction. Interestingly, those people that scored high on strategic perspective also scored high on champions change. The numbers in brackets is the percentile in the database. So they were above average, 50 being the 50th, being the average, 50th percentile. They were significantly above average, not just in strategic perspective, but associated competencies like champions change and establishes stretch goals. And they massively outperformed their emotionally intelligent peers. Those people that were really good at strategic perspective also seem to spark greater innovation and drive greater resilience. It seems that if I'm a colleague surrounded by all of that noise and all of that change, I start to get really burnt out. I start to really feel uncomfortable and tired with it all. But as soon as my leader, my boss says, here's the strategic direction we're going, it seems to create an environment in which I can be experimental within a framework, or I can be strong and powerful because I know I only need to follow this direction rather than moving in lots of different directions and responding to all of the noise. So these leaders with strategic perspective seem to create a gelled organization with aligned purpose and meaning and a strong why. They seem to be able to create an environment for innovation and resilience. It also seems to strengthen trust and communication. So contrary to the sort of historical perception that the strategist was a cold strategist, it seems that these leaders were also good at inspiring and motivating people and communicating powerfully, possibly because that clarity just helped to remove anxiety. Instead of me as an employee second guessing what I should be doing or second guessing what the right course of action is, I'm now confident that this is the right course of action because my leader has given me that clarity, has given me that perspective. So it seems that you get associated benefits around trust and associated benefits around communication if you're just good at strategic perspective. And this last one I think is really powerful. Those leaders that were good at strategic thinking or strategic perspective seem to be able to ground a conversation. If I'm having a conversation with my colleague or my team member and I'm trying to empathize and understand their world, it was still in a referenceable framework around what strategy that we were trying to pursue. So as it says there, authentic leadership requires more than just compassion and empathy. It requires direction. It requires, I understand you in the context of this strategic direction. If I just understand you, but without direction and without strategic perspective, then it's nice, it's compassionate, but it doesn't necessarily help somebody to move forward in a particular direction. So there's some associated competencies that seem to come along with strategic thinking that I think is really valuable or value adding as long as they start with the position of having great strategic thinking. So there's a strong why, and the last why is a separate piece of research conducted by the World Economic Forum that talks about skills for the future. And I've just highlighted in the top right-hand quadrant those skills that are anticipated to be core in 2025 and still core in 2030 are in the top right-hand quadrant. And you can see creative thinking, analytical thinking, systems thinking, alongside what you'd absolutely expect, like AI literacy and technology literacy, but also alongside some of those human skills, the resilience, the flexibility, the agility, the leadership, and the social influence. So it's not just us saying strategic thinking is powerful and important. It seems that the change agenda demands it. Organizations and team colleagues demands it. It's not just us saying it, the World Economic Forum are saying it. And we're certainly getting a lot of demand from our clients around strategic thinking and perspective. So with that, I'm going to dive into some of the content. But before we do, here's a little bit of participation. Using the chat function, before we get into what are the skills or competencies or tools that can be used to strategically think, let's have a chat about what is the opposite of strategic thinking. You know that sentence I said earlier, oh, that person would be great. We should promote that person, but we shouldn't. Why shouldn't we? Well, they're just not strategic. What are they doing then? What's the opposite of strategic thinking? If you can just put that in the chat function for me, that'd be great. I see something coming in already. Okay, what have we got? Reactive. So it's a classic. So I'm no longer the designer. I'm just reacting to stuff. Business as usual, short term, not long term. Not providing guidance to others. I love that. Narrow-mindedness. We're going to talk about that. Thank you for the narrow-minded. Very blinkered, that idea that they don't think beyond their own domain. Hoping that's not a great strategy. Firefighting. Firefighting's fascinating, isn't it? We seem to be addicted to firefighting these days, and we actually applaud firefighting and give people hero status. So a lack of vision, firefighting, business as usual. Thank you for that. Yeah, lots of people saying that short termism. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that contribution. Let's dive in. Here's a few additions to that, if I may. Right. So short termism, where we're prioritizing immediate results over long term. You turn to that person, and go, yeah, they're all about the now. They're not really thinking about the future. They're not planning. Reactive decision making and firefighting. Thank you for that. Responding to events. I love this one. I hear it all the time. How are you? I'm busy. Tactical busyness. Lots of activity, lots of noise, lots of movement, but not necessarily a lot of progress. Local optimism. What I mean by that is they're not strategic because they're only interested in supporting their own area of the business. They're not looking at the upstream and downstream consequences. So in order for them to be strategic, they'd have to think in a more of an enterprise way, as opposed to just a departmental way or just a selfish way, dare I say. A vision without choices, being blinkered, biased, or narrow. I think people put that in the chat function, being narrow-minded, if you like. The last three often doesn't show up, which is people who come up with lots of ideas. And this isn't a creative thinking workshop. That would be an adjacent workshop. But it creates lots of ideas, but don't necessarily make a decision, and certainly don't make a decision that then leads to tangible actions. So I may be gathering in lots of information, doing my SWOT analysis and my pest analysis and doing all of that stuff and generating lots of ideas. But to be a strategic thinker, I have to make decisions about each of those alternatives. We saw it in the Michael Porter definition. We've got to make some choices there. So coming up with ideas or coming up with a plan, but that's not necessarily leading to action. One of the challenges that leaders face, or even individuals face around strategic thinking, is having done all of the work, being somewhat overwhelmed by the magnitude of the decision at the end that says, right, we either turn left or right. Yeah, but what if we turn left and find out it doesn't work? Do we need to put some contingency in? So just at the sort of back end of strategic thinking, there's this idea that there's a bit of a tension point between commitment in a course of direction, a particular path, whilst at the same time making sure that I'm sufficiently agile to change my mind strategically should I receive new and different information than I previously had. So that challenge of this all or nothing for fully committed mindset, how do I build in some agility? So when you see that, I suspect that's when you look at that individual and you say, we'd love to promote them. We'd love to put them in the succession plan, but they're just not strategic. It's probably because they're doing some of those things you see on the screen. So I'm going to spend the next part of this webinar taking you through a very short and snappy taster of some of the content that we typically explore with some of our learners that come on our programs. Clearly, this would be over a much more extended time period to help them explore it more specifically for them. We use this 3 E's framework. The first E, talking about clarifying the objectives that our strategic thinking is seeking to solve and work towards. So what's the problem? What's our objectives? And how do I strategically align stakeholders and people's thoughts about the direction of travel that we're going on? You'll often say that person's not a strategic thinker because they're a lone wolf. They work on their own. That person's not a strategic thinker because they haven't aligned upstream and downstream resources. And therefore, whatever they come up with won't work because they're doing it in splendid isolation. So evaluate. The second E is about anticipating all the different what ifs and what are the different scenarios and investigating alternative perspectives and options, arguably to avoid that narrow-mindedness that we made reference to, or that bias. You'll hear yourself saying they're not a very strategic thinker. Why? Because they're so blinkered. They don't think about things in a broader perspective. And then the last E is execute. How do I then build a plan that's aligned to that strategic view, that's committed but not overcommitted? And that tension point between commitment to action, but making sure I've got some adaptability built in, because adaptability is strategic. So that's our 3 E's framework. I'm going to briefly dive into each of them. So, and there's a couple of exercises for you along the way. The first of which is around evaluate. I love this quote. Our greatest fear should not be of failure, but of succeeding at something that doesn't really matter. So this idea that a strategic thinker is somebody who's actually identifying what things really matter, what things will create the biggest impact, the biggest return on investment, what things will create a delta, really make a difference to the organization. And how do I compare? And this is, I think, at the heart of strategic thinking. How do I compare two relatively good or equally good ideas? I think the idea that strategic thinking is a comparison between something that is good and something as bad is a misnomer. If it was that easy, everybody would do it. Everybody would find it easy to choose the strategic course of direction that was good and then eliminate the bad. As per the Michael Porter definition, you've got to make some choices, and the choices, and why strategic thinking is sometimes hard. The choices on the surface can look equally good. So how do I decide between A and B when both of them look equally good? And we have to decide. And the reason why we have to decide is I guess everybody on this call recognizes that we've got finite resources. I probably haven't got the budget to do both. I probably haven't got the time. I probably haven't got the headcount. So how do I evaluate which of these two really good ideas I should follow? Or do I keep my options open? And then you'll get accused of lacking conviction. So to avoid that accusation, I need to be able to assess these two different really good ideas. So that's what evaluate is about, this idea that we're identifying what really matters. So as I said, there's a little bit of an exercise, one of which is a bit silly, but we'll get to that now. Okay, so scenario number one, we're going to make a choice. It's a recruitment scenario, but it could be anything. It could be you're just making a choice, right? So here's the scenario. You interview Sarah, and she's exceptional at A, B, and C. She'd be a great fit for your business, especially as you really need A, B, and C capabilities in your business. A day later, you interview Tarek, and he's fantastic at X, Y, and Z. He too would be perfect for your business, as X, Y, and Z are in short supply in your business. So you've got two equally good things. Which one do you recruit? Who do you choose? Now, I'm not asking you to answer that question because it's a silly question. Hopefully you see that it's a silly question. And I think it's silly, but the answer depends on what the problem is that you're solving. What problem are you solving by recruiting anybody? And we need to understand that in advance of interviewing them. And we need to understand them in advance of interviewing because we'll be distorted by our preferences once we see them. Once we meet Sarah, once we meet Tarek, once we avail ourselves of the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 choices, we can't help but start to get distorted by our own filters of what we as an individual, not we as a strategic thinker, but we as an individual prefer or like or enjoy being around. That's not a strategic thinker. How many of you have heard somebody say, oh, that leader seems to surround himself or herself with people who are just the same as them? Well, they probably weren't clear about what kind of person they wanted, or certainly hadn't strategically thought about what person they wanted. So when they interviewed 5 people, inevitably they gravitated to the person who was very similar to them. So it is a silly question. The answer depends on what problem you're solving and what is your objective. And importantly, what criteria are you using to select whether it's Sarah or whether it's Tarek, which of course you should have explored in advance of interviewing either of them. That doesn't happen sometimes, and that's why we get accused of not being strategic. We didn't think about the problem, we didn't think about what good looks like, and we didn't necessarily think about the criteria of choice in advance. Against which, of course, you will have done your pest analysis or your SWOT analysis, which, according to Sun Tzu, of course, is about self-awareness and social awareness, making sure you understand your marketplace or your situation, what you're good at and what your competitors are good at. And if you don't do that, without which we get accused of not being strategic. That's not aligned to our current position in the marketplace. Why did she make that choice? They obviously just have favorites. So that's the opposite of strategic thinking. So we have to think about this in advance. And just to bring that to life a little bit, imagine if you chose Sarah only to find out in the process of getting Sarah to sign the contract that Sarah wants 20% more salary than Tarek. That actually Sarah lives closer to the office, but that doesn't really matter. Sarah's not available for 3 months, but Tarek is. Not that that really matters because this is a long-term appointment, not a short-term. The thing is, Tarek speaks French, which isn't needed right now, but it might be useful because we've just opened a Paris office. All of these things arguably should have been put into consideration for you to make a strategic choice. Okay, now I'm going to give you another scenario, probably a little bit more realistic and less silly, and let's see what you come up with. So scenario number 2 is to do with a software purchaser. And once I share with you the scenario, I'm going to ask you to make a choice, but I'm actually going to give you a minute or so to think about why you made a particular choice. And was your choice informed or not informed by any particular experiences that you've had in your life or had in this particular space? So imagine it's a software purchaser and it goes a bit like this. You need to pick a new piece of software for your team. It's quite complicated and it's the backbone of a lot of your team's work. Getting the wrong software will waste a lot of time and probably money and could damage the reputation of the company. You must select a supplier. Of the 2 options you're considering, one has a good reputation as an existing supplier. Therefore, implementing the software won't cost too much as it will be a bolt-on to the existing system. You've found that the product meets most of your needs and understand that the rest could be brought up to specification over time. Good news, the IT team say that they can help and they're prepared to help you with implementing it. The other supplier you're considering has never worked with you before. They're a startup and their implementation fees are a lot higher. But the software is regarded as the absolute best in the market for exactly what you're trying to do. It's got everything you need straight away as standard, as well as a set of extra functionalities you haven't explored yet, but could help you in the future. So I'm going to give you with that dilemma, and I want you to strategically think, which one would you choose? And why? If you want to put which one in the chat function, you can, just to get a sense of what everybody in the room is choosing. And if you want in the chat room to write why, that would be interesting too. I'll give you a minute to think about it. Feel free to share your choice. Or people now being shy to share their choice. Thanks, Caroline. A new startup. New startup. People are being bold with the new start. Oh, new startup. Everybody wants the new startup because they sound good, right? And it sounds long term, doesn't it? Sounds more strategic, and that's okay. There's no right or wrong answer. Rachel, brilliant. It depends. What was your criteria? So literally only a minute ago, I was saying, well, it depends what problem you're solving. It depends what good looks like in terms of what's your solution, what are you trying to do, and what is your criteria for selecting. And even though that was only a minute or so, and you might have some logic, we've probably gone with a relatively subjective opinion without doing the work about problem solving, without setting the objective, and without choosing the criteria, right? And that's what needs to go into strategic thinking, or we're going to end up making a decision, and from a distance, somebody will say, "Why did they choose that one? That doesn't look very strategic. That's not in line with our cost base, or that's not in line with our IT setup, or that's not in line with the future direction of the business, or that's not." But we get compelled, and of course I forced you. I sort of said you must make a decision. So with that in mind, what's the summation of the evaluate stuff? And obviously we would dive into when we're running a workshop over a day or so, we would dive into that section in a lot more detail as people are making their way through their SWOT analysis, or making their way through their marketplace analysis, or their situational review, and ask them to start thinking about choices they are making over investments, over headcount, over capital investments, over technology, over software, over people, over headcount, over organizational design, all the choices that they're making, strategic choices. Are you absolutely sure about the problem that you're solving, what your goal is, and the criteria for selecting? Probably from two equally good options. You could probably tell yourself a story as to why you should use software supplier A. You could probably tell yourself a story why you should use software supplier B. But rather than tell yourself a story to support one or the other, why don't we be very clear and aligned with our stakeholders around us as to the problem, the goal, and the criteria? So that demands that you understand the SWOT and the PEST. You understand whether you're seeking to solve a problem that's short-term or long-term. And what is the tension? And it's a classic tension, isn't it? You could have that, but it's going to cost you more. Or you can have that, but you can get it immediately, but the quality might not be a high. You can have that, but it's not available until 2027. So what are the classic cost, quality, time conundrums that we're playing with? And we need to understand what we really want, what is our criteria for choosing. If we don't do this, then we get back to those definitions of the opposite of strategic thinking. We end up being short-term, we end up making reactive decisions, and we end up self-serving rather than serving the organization if we haven't done that thinking. So from the evaluate part of the 3 E's, for us to be deemed strategic thinking, we have to be very clear about what our objective is. What is the specific result that we are looking to create? Now, specific results is a little hard. I find that really tough personally, because I always find that one result is having a direct or an indirect result on another result. You're making trade-offs, and that was part of the definition, right? But the better we are at defining it, the better we are at making the best choices. So a specific result that a person or a system wants to achieve within a given time frame might be strategic to get it done within 3 months. It might be strategic to get it done within 3 years. So what's the time frame? What resources do you have available? Pointless making that decision because we haven't got the resources to do it. So what resources do we have available? And that has to be based on some specific, and here's my critical word, predetermined decision-making criteria. And if we've aligned on that decision-making criteria with our stakeholders, they're more likely to judge us as going, that was strategic because that was in keeping with the direction of travel or where the business is going, or what we'd decided was the decision-making criteria. So if we can help people to do that, great. Now, I imagine, by the way, in an organization, you can see where that does happen and where it doesn't. I can also imagine that you see that at home with the kids, where you go, what was your decision-making criteria for what you did? What made you think that was the right thing to do? Why did you think that was ever going to get you the result that you wanted? And your kids will make better choices if they are very clear about the specific result that they want to make, over what time, with what available resources, based on some criteria. So my point is that strategic thinking isn't just the domain. Big corporate strategy is often the domain of senior leaders and the elite, but strategic thinking is available for anybody. Let me transition from the first E to the second E. Again, another quote that I really like. There are two kinds of people that lose money: those that know nothing because they're ignorant, and therefore they made choices with limited knowledge, limited information, limited wisdom, limited skills, limited capability. And those that know everything, because they made choices from a position of arrogance. They made choices from a position in which they were not aware of their blind spots because they didn't think they had any blind spots. So this section here around strategic thinking is very much around diversity of thought, alternative perspectives, making sure that we investigate options and choices, not from a single position because we're going to be filtered and we're going to be blinkered. So just to bring it to life with a relatively simple metaphor, I don't know whether naturally you would say you're an optimist. I think I'm an optimist generally, or whether you would say you're a pessimist. I don't know. Can you be a realistic optimist? Can you sort of balance the two? Well, imagine you are doing a parachute jump, and let's be clear about the objective. The objective is a safe thrill. It's not just a thrill. If the objective was a thrill, you'd jump out of the aeroplane without a parachute. If the objective was just safety, well, you might as well just jump off a chair. It's probably something in the domain of, I want a challenge, I want an achievement, I want it to be safe, but I also want it to be thrilling, a safe thrill. Well, of course, when you signed up to do the parachute jump, I assume it was optimism that was mainly making you sign. When it was the day of the parachute jump and the alarm went off in bed, I'm pretty sure it was optimism that got you out of bed. When you got to the aircraft hangar and there was an instructor who laid out the parachute and was giving you detailed instructions on what string to pull and how to pack it and how to wear it, and was taking you through the steps of how you would sit in the aeroplane, how you would shuffle to the edge, how you would be strapped to that person that was going to jump with you, and taking you through all of those details, I would argue that pessimism might be more helpful, because pessimism would probably make you concentrate. But as soon as you got in the aeroplane, of course, it would be either a boot in the back of your bag or indeed optimism that made you jump out, right? So the point I'm making around this silly analogy is, in order to get the complex results that we're looking for, we probably need both perspectives. We probably need optimism and pessimism. If we were only ever optimistic, always optimistic, the judge would look at us and go, well, they're not very strategic. Why? Well, they keep just, being too hopeful. They're unrealistic. They're silly. They keep making silly decisions. They keep wasting a lot of money. Obviously, the optimist will go, no, but you only ever learn from failure, and therefore that was really good. And we tried lots of different ideas, and one of those ideas will be amazing and make us loads of money. Okay, maybe. But if you're singularly optimistic and you make choices from that attitudinal position alone, then I would argue you're likely to get judged as being not very strategic. Equally, if you make choices from a position of pessimism, that person's not very strategic. Why? Well, they just say no to everything. Nothing ever happens. We don't take action. We don't move anything forward. We don't innovate. And we need to innovate because we need to break into new markets. So we need to reestablish ourselves as the number one in the marketplace. Therefore, we need something new and something energizing. So I would argue you can't really make strategic decisions from one attitudinal position, from one perspective, from one lens. And that's really what the explore part of the 3 E's is all about. So this is a quick sort of referenceable framework. I'm not going to dive too much into it on this call, given the amount of time we've got available. But it was developed by Quinn and Robo. It really helps us to make some decisions from multiple lenses, and it really helps us to highlight our blind spots and highlight if there is any biases and preferences that might get in the way of us strategically thinking. And we typically work with our clients around 4 lenses. And we say attitudinally, capability, or prospectively. Let's spend some time sitting with the choices that we have available. Sarah, Tarek, one software supplier, another software supplier, whatever choices that we have available. And as I said earlier, this is not a creative thinking workshop. So the creative thinking workshop would generate 50 choices. As soon as we've done that, we've got to filter those choices through a lens. And one of those, and we'll sit with it for a period of time, is what results are they getting? Are they short-term results, long-term results? Are they high impact? Are they low impact? Are they strategically aligned? Will it cost us a lot of money? Will the quality be high enough? Will that differentiate us in the market? Is it the best possible result? And let's compare them all. The second lens that we sit with, if you're familiar with S curves, is each of these ideas simply, at the lower end of the S curve where it's very innovative, it's very creative, it might not give us a return for another couple of years, but we will be first to market. We'll be an early mover by adopting this particular strategy. And therefore, we will be the beneficiaries when this marketplace takes off. So is it the bottom of the S curve, middle of the S curve? Is it the top of the S curve? Is it evolution or is it revolution? In what way do each of these 50 different choices help us to stand out? And does that matter to us? Does it matter whether we are innovative and doing something unique in the marketplace? Or is it just that we're in the middle of the S curve and we're doing what everybody else is doing and it's not going to differentiate us? The choice we make might improve our processes compared to the processor we've got now, but actually all it's doing is helping us to catch up with where the competition already are with their processes. So what results are they? Is there a better way of doing it? Is there an innovative way of doing it? Is this going to make a substantial difference? Let's sit with that really optimistic, energetic lens for quite a while. The third lens is, are we the right person? Are we the right group of people to collaborate on this? Should we be bringing out in some external consultants? Is there any other pockets of wisdom in the organization who can bring something to this decision-making process? So who should be involved? And finally, and it is finally, the risk, pessimistic. Are we being realistic? What if? What's the unintended consequences? How might this affect upstream and downstream? Is there something that we haven't thought of that might jeopardize this? Let's really understand the risk profile and let's definitely understand the consequence profile. The distinction being risk profile, what's the percentage chance of it working or not working? Consequence profile, what happens if it doesn't work? So those two things are slightly different, and it's important that that goes last. If that goes first, it usually stops everything else from happening anyway. So put that last. Let's keep the energy, but let's make sure we are being strategic by making sure that we don't fall into some traps. And the pessimistic or cynic or, dare I say, skeptical person helps us to spot those traps. So these are 4 attitudinal lenses, process lenses, and capability lenses that if we can strategically, either on our own, think through these lenses, or bring a community of people together that helps us to think through these lenses, we're more likely to make decisions that people would say, well, that's a strategic decision. It was well thought through. It wasn't blinkered. It was broad. That person brought in lots more information before they made the decision. So evaluate is all about being clear about the problem you're solving, your goal, and the criteria you're going to choose, you're going to use to make some decisions. The explorer is exploring all of those options and gathering in as much data and information you can through 4 different lenses, rather than just your optimistic lens or just your pessimistic lens or just your own lived experience lens. Why don't we invite other people who've got a different lived experience in that particular order? I don't know which you are. It's useful to know which you are. I know I'm a results and a sort of optimistic person. I sometimes don't see the risks. I think somebody put in a word on the chat function earlier, which was the word hope. I've definitely fallen foul of hope being a good strategy. It very rarely is. So it's useful to have somebody else giving you those different perspectives to make those different strategic decisions. So following that process certainly will help us with eliminating any biases. And that's an accusation leveled at non-strategic thinkers very regularly. that person's not strategic. Why? What makes you say that? They're really biased. They only follow a particular pattern of actions or behaviors because they think that's the best. That's just the way they are. That's their attitude. And secondly, it allows us to eliminate any blind spots that we just didn't know about it. Goes back to that quote earlier. The people that fail the most are the people that know nothing and think they know everything. And of course, it helps us to avoid the previously stated definitions of non-strategic behavior, i.e. local optimism and a vision without some choices. So that is the explore piece. Just rounding that off, something to note around particularly the collaborate element and this idea that we bring communities of people together to collaborate. And that often has an association with diversity, which I can see that association. A little bit of a watch out around. It must be strategically thought through because there was a diverse group of people in the room discussing the options and discussing the choices. So this was actually a piece of research taken from a study in America to do with colleges. There was a college in America that had 30,000 students, and there was a college in America that had, I think it was 350 students. And the researchers were looking not at which college was the most diverse, but which college behaved the most diversely, i.e., which college had people interacting with one another who were quite different from one another, but neurologically, etc. And on the face of it, as you look at this screen, you'd think the most diverse organization was the organization on the left. Makes sense to me. Why? It's got lots of different types of people. It's got red, blue, orange, white, black, green, yellow, lots of different people. On the right-hand side, there's only 4 variants. But weirdly, the larger the organization, the less diverse it behaves. The large organization, because it's so large and because people like themselves, they tend to create these cliques. So they end up with this idea that we've got a problem to solve in the sales department. Who shall we invite to solve the problem? Because Steve told us we should collaborate. I shouldn't just use my own opinion to come up with the answer. Okay, and unfortunately, they end up inviting all the other people in the sales department. So you start to get an echo chamber. We've got a HR problem, so HR people solve it. We've got a finance problem, so finance people solve it. In the smaller organizations, there's not enough people to do that. So they end up working far closer together. So just a little bit of a watch out on collaboration. It isn't a function of the number of people, it's a function of the diversity of the people. Are they bringing unique and different perspectives to the dialogue in order for you to strategically think, and dare I say, strategically choose between your options? So evaluate, explore. The key message is use that lens thinking to explore different options and eliminate bias and avoid blind spots. The last one, and probably one of my favorites, it doesn't sound strategic. It sounds... because the phrase strategic thinking has got association with lots of planning, strategic thinking, but all of which is useless without strategic execution. But there's a dilemma, and I alluded to it earlier. The dilemma is how do I have this commitment to a course of action? Those leaders that are very clear that this is where we're going. I've based it on the SWOT analysis, the PEST analysis. This is where we're going, and this is how we're going to achieve things based on the choices that I had available, and I've chosen A, B, and C. So let's go and spend X amount of money with X amount of headcount, and let's get the job done because we're going in this direction. But how does that sit with this idea of what if some new information comes into the organization that says that course of action isn't wise anymore? And of course, the fallacy that you can fall into if you continue to pursue in that course of action that could get labeled as not strategic is the sunk cost fallacy, where I've started along that path, I've emotionally committed to go along that path. So to reverse out of it, my ego can't stand it. I've already invested so much into it. I might as well carry on, even if it hurts me, even if it cost me financially or cost me emotionally. Somehow we've sunk so much into it that we carry on, and therefore we're not agile. So how do you balance that tension point between those 2 points? Clearly, if you don't, you will be accused of not being strategic. That person's not strategic. Why? They didn't use the new information and they were not agile. Or that person's not strategic. Why? They keep all of their options open and they never commit to a certain course of action. So how do you balance those two things? Is it a little fun game? Five people sitting on a fence. One person decides to get off for strategic reasons, obviously. How many people are left on the fence? It's a bit of a trick. There are still five people deciding to get off the fence and actually committing to get off the fence. Those are two different things. So deciding and action are two different things. And of course, in the execute phase, we want to avoid idea generation without decision making. It's not just about strategically thinking and coming up with loads of ideas. It's about decision making and action taking. So a plan without action is not strategic thinking. But equally, we stick with this all or nothing or agile mindset. There's a bit of a dilemma, and we need to be able to do both. So I'm going to introduce you to a little strategy that we called taking the 8 steps. I love this strategy. It's not mine. I didn't come up with it. A colleague of mine came up with it, but it really resonates with me because I like climbing mountains. So I was really pleased when he came up with it. So taking 8 steps. This is a story that says a mountaineer has got to 8,000 meters on Mount Everest. For those of you that don't know, Mount Everest is 8,848 meters. And they're strategically appraising what they should do. Obviously, they've set themselves a goal in the evaluate stage, which is to get to the summit, which is 848 more meters to go. That's their goal. They obviously need to do it within a certain time window, and so that's their goal. So choice, I could carry on towards the top, but the danger increases and I could die. Second choice, I could acknowledge that I'm not going to get to the top and go back down the mountain and live. They're not the only choices. Obviously, there's also the choice called I could carry on to the top and live and be successful. So there's not only those choices, but those are the two very stark choices. And the work that we do with clients is this question. As you're standing there at 8,000 meters, can you describe the next 8 steps? And they're not literally 8 steps. Maybe they're 8 sections of the project plan. Or can you describe the first 8 steps if you're at the bottom of the mountain and you want to execute your plan and it's right at the beginning of the plan? But right now, in terms of this metaphor, we're at 8,000 meters. But the question is still the same. Can you describe the next 8 steps? I'm not asking you to describe the entire journey of your capital expenditure or your entire journey of your strategic plan. I'm just asking, can you describe the next 8 steps? The answer might be yes. I can describe the next 8 steps. It will take me up to the South Col on Mount Everest. I can do that. Okay, good. Do you feel motivated to take the next 8 steps? Yeah, I feel motivated to take the next 8 steps. I can describe them. I'm going to take the next 8 steps. Before you take the next 8 steps, what I want you to do is describe what conditions will need to be true once you get there for you to carry on towards the top. I'll repeat that. What conditions will need to be true for you to carry on to the top? And if those conditions are not met because there is new information, you should turn back. To avoid the sunk cost fallacy, you should shift direction. You should go left, you should go right, or you should go back down the mountain. So, okay, I'm going to describe the next 8 steps or the first 8 steps, depending on where we are in this whole journey. And the conditions are in 8 steps time, I need to have enough energy. The weather needs to be okay. The underfoot conditions need to be okay. I still need to have my Sherpa team or my team around me. Nobody's been lost on the journey so far. I need to make sure I've got the resources. I need to make sure my eyesight is okay. These are the conditions that I'm going to put in place. I go on my march and complete my 8 steps. I'm still some distance away from the top, but I've taken the next 8 steps. And it seems to me like the weather is changing and I seem to have really fatigued. Now I need to take that new information and be agile. So the strategy that we help help leaders to strategically think about is that strategy that says you're very clear about your goal. It's to get to the top of Everest, or it's to make a difference in the marketplace, or it's to hit EBIT numbers or hit revenue numbers. You're clear about that. You're clear about your strategy of achieving it. Absolutely, that's good. And to avoid inertia, to avoid that moment where you go, should I or shouldn't I? Should I commit or shouldn't I commit? Why don't you rather commit to the entirety of it? Why don't you commit to the next 8 steps, however big they are? But make sure you describe what the conditions need to be like after you've arrived, so that you say, look, the conditions have changed. I don't think we should invest another $100,000 because the data is telling us it's not working. Or I don't think we should do that because the headcount isn't working. Something's changed, and therefore I'm going to make a strategic decision to slightly shift to one direction. So there's the strategy. Take 8 steps. A mountain climber scales the highest mountain, breaking it down into the next 8 steps. That's what they do. Having made a strategic decision, you should break your execution down into the next 8 steps. But you should always make sure that you've understood exactly what the conditions necessary for the next 8 steps to avoid that sunk cost fallacy. Or else you'll be blinkered again, and people will say that was foolish. He wasn't, or she wasn't, a very strategic thinker. Why? They just kept going on and on and on, despite all the information telling them that they shouldn't. And there it is. Strategic thinking seems to be a really prevalent topic right now, possibly because there's so much noise around change, possibly because people are struggling with all of that change, and therefore we need people to be able to individually think more strategically so that they can have some commitment, they can be confident to follow a certain course of action, but also we want our leaders to be thinking strategically so that we follow that course of action. And from a distance, we don't want to be able to judge them and say they're not strategic. Why are they not strategic? Well, they're very short term. They're very biased. They're very blinkered. They're not very agile. And this process helps people to. I recently heard a definition of higher intelligence. Higher intelligence was the ability to metacognate. So metacognition being your ability to think about your thinking. Everybody thinks, but the highly intelligent think about their thoughts. So they're able to notice and think that their thoughts are biased, or they're able to notice and think that they have blinkered thoughts, or they're able to think that their objectives are unclear, or they're able to think that they didn't establish a criteria. Your ability to think about the quality of your thinking is what strategic thinking is. To help frame that, we use the 3 E's: evaluate, explore, and execute. And with that, I think we're sort of nearly there on time. 2 minutes left. If you want to get in touch via the QR code.